Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. George Grisham here. And ta-da! These are two sisters. Two books in Russian and in English. In Russian just received recently, today actually, in English received 2 weeks ago from our publishers. They're both about Dénia. One is called Delightful Dénia, a history, and the other Divная Dénia, which is very much like Delightful Dénia, but in Russian. We are preparing the Spanish text, which will be published in about a month's time. There is a German variant. We're thinking about a French text, etc. And what we're actually doing is our lectures are very much the same, parts of this book. I have 12 chapters in the book. The book is quite short, although it took me about 5 or 6 years to write it. And we are going with you lecture by lecture, chapter by chapter from the book. But actually, what takes you 5 minutes to read in the book takes me about half an hour to tell you in this series of lectures. And today we're talking chapter 8. We're talking about the 18th century, the century which changed it all. The century when Spain became French. Bourbons, the French dynasty started being the Spanish monarchs. Lots of independence, especially of different kingdoms like Aragon and Valencia, was lost. The first pan-European war, the so-called the First World War, the War for Spanish Succession, burst out in 1700 and lasted till 1714, 1715. After that, Spain needed half a century to, start surviving, start flourishing again. So the second part of 18th century is the epoch of Enlightenment, the same as in France. So we are going to talk about Philip V and a few Carloses. First, about Habsburgs. They were really a pan-European dynasty. And by the tragic year 1700, you can see the two branches of Habsburgs, the senior one in Spain and the junior one in Austria and Holy Roman Empire, were occupying 2/3 of Europe, but they started losing their territories. These striped areas are shown as what they lost by 1700. So yes, a major loss. And who was their arch enemy? France. Not just France, the strengthening France, the France of the Sun King, Louis XIV, Louis XIV, and his huge and very sort of persistent fight with Spain, with England as well, with Netherlands, actually caused France to become one of the strongest European empires at the beginning of 18th century, and Spain to lose lots of its positions. But why this fight for dynasties? Why this fight for the Spanish throne? Nice and simple. Habsburgs in Spain only lasted less than 200 years, less than 2 centuries. Charles I, Carlos I, 3 Philips, the second, the third, and the fourth, and Charles II, Carlos II, died childless. Lots of pretenders for the throne, but the main were from Bourbons, because Louis XIV was married to a Spanish princess, the daughter of the Spanish Philip IV. So without too much problems, he put his own grandson, Philip V of Anjou, on the Spanish throne. And Bourbons, yes, Bourbons started occupying the throne. They're still here now. They're still the monarchs of Spain, the Bourbons. So they've been here between 1700 and today, 2020. So there were lots of presidents, and you can see how strange these dynasty trees look like, with French monarchs, with German or Austrian monarchs, and Spanish monarchs, and their family lines being completely intertwined. With Charles II here, the childless one, having given birth to a lot of presidents in Austria, but also with Philip IV, as you can see, via Louis XIV, given the right to Philip V, the Bourbon heir. People involved, monarchs involved. I've actually duplicated Philip's and Carlos's, but in the center, we have the poor of his health, of his destiny, Carlos II, the last Habsburg in Spain, the one who died childless in 1700. He was called El Hechizado, enchanted. Well, he was born to die quite soon, but still he lived for 38 years. And there were few attempts to marry him, or he was married twice, no children surviving, unfortunately. Then we have Philip V, El Animoso, the vivid one, who was occupying the throne of Spain for 46 years. Nobody sat on Spanish throne longer than him. 1700, 1746. Here is Philip V and his granddad, Louis XIV, the Sun King of France. And here's Philip V as well, upside down. That's how his portrait he has been hung in Chátiva, not far away from here, because Chátiva was completely burned by Philip's troops in 1707. So they don't like him there. This portrait, although was put in this position only in 1940, not of course during the Bourbons' strength in Spain. And here we have the president, Carlos, as well. The Archduke Carlos of Austria and Germany, the one who wanted to become the Habsburg king, to be called Carlos III of Spain, but he never became. Carlos III of Spain, he was fighting for the throne in Spain between 1705 and 1713, but then in 1713 he was elected the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Carlos VI, and he transferred himself from Barcelona. I'll tell you later why it was Barcelona, from Barcelona to Austria, and that was more or less the end of the war. The main pretendent being transferred, or actually moving himself from Spain to Austria, and then becoming one of the most important emperors in the Austrian history. Look at the figures. Look at the dates. In 1700, when this guy started occupying the throne of Spain, he was 17 years old. When this guy, young, beautiful, came to Spain to fight him, he was 20 years old. Boys. But these two boys, their rivalry caused the first pan-European war, the War of Spanish Succession. After which, lots of things happened. First of all, strengthening of England. England actually became Great Britain. Why? Because France supported Jacobites, Stuarts. And in order to prevent a king of the Stuart blood, James II or James III, becoming a king of Scotland or a king even of England, the country united and actually became Great Britain during the war for the Spanish succession. Britain got Gibraltar, 1704. Britain got Minorca. Britain strengthened altogether, became a world power during this particular war, because the war was going on everywhere, in the Caribbean, everywhere. France, well, France sort of kept its position. But Spain lost most of its European possessions. Look, Naples was Spanish, became Austrian. Sardinia was Spanish, became Austrian. Netherlands were Spanish, became Austrian, and so on and so forth. The independent Netherlands, the Dutch Republic, lost its strength as well, a lot, because they invested in the war against France and they just spent lots of money. Savoy was one of the strange winners because Savoy was a duchy, but after the war it was first given Sicily and then Sardinia, and Savoy became called the Sardinian Kingdom. And this status as a kingdom would help Savoy a lot during Italian unification in 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. But Savoy was already extra rich. But the fact that Savoy was given the status of the kingdom after the war actually helped it a lot. So indirectly helped Italian unification as well. Now the war. Strangely enough, the war didn't start immediately. 1700, Louis XIV puts his grandson Philip V on Spanish throne. Philip goes to Madrid, gets married to a princess from Savoy, very young. She was 14 years old. Excuse me, that's my phone, but I'm not going to pick it. And this is it. Nothing happens. But then the war actually starts 2 years later. England became not very happy about the claims of France. England and Netherlands and Austria became not very happy about the fact that there was a possibility of two Bourbons, the Spanish ones and French ones, uniting two countries. That will be a super rich state. So everybody was terrified about the unification. So the war started, but the war started in Netherlands, in Belgium, and in Italy. Philip V went to fight in Italy. There was a fight actually from Madrid. And only in 1705, British or English reached an agreement with Catalonians that Catalonians will let them step on Spanish land. So Catalonians started supporting the Habsburg claim. But why? Because they were really trading partners of the British, not because of the Habsburgs. So what happened first? The Archduke, the President, and English troops went to Lisbon, to Portugal, because Portugal was always, since 14th century, an ally of England, tried to invade Spain from Porto, failed, and then when English reached an agreement with Catalonia, they sat on their vessels, left Lisbon, went to Barcelona, and from 1705, Archduke Carlos was based in Barcelona. And from there, he entered Madrid twice, but twice he had to retrieve because most of Castilla was supporting Bourbons. Most of Valencia, Aragon, Catalonia was supporting Habsburgs. So the country was split like this. Not completely. There are lots of articles who are saying, yeah, there were, partisans on both sides, but still there was a split. And for Catalonia, the war lasted from 1705 till 1714, 9 years. But for Valencia and Aragon, much shorter. 1707, April, the Battle of Almansa, not far away from here. Almansa is a key position because from Almansa you can easily reach Valencia, you can easily reach Alicante and Dénia as well. So the Battle of Almansa was lost by British and, well, Habsburg troops to the troops of Bourbons, the troops of Philip V. And in the Valencian parliament, you will see the huge painting, which also hangs in Madrid and in other places, which shows this Battle of Almansa. The Battle of Almansa caused disappearance of the Kingdom of Valencia, disappearance of the Kingdom of Aragon, the so-called decrees of Nueva Planta decrees, the new law or new order decrees, the abolition of local laws, of local languages, and so forth, 1707. The same happened in Barcelona in 1714, the fall of Barcelona and the Nueva Planta in Barcelona. During this period, Dénia was besieged 3 times because Dénia was supporting Habsburgs, as most of Valencia was, okay? But Xàtiva, the poor little Xàtiva, was burned down completely. That's why here, for instance, Felipe V is shown with his blooded lips after the Almansa, because he killed the Kingdom of Valencia. All right, what Dénia? What was the role of Dénia here? Oh, the role of Dénia was fantastic because, remember, see, this is British money spent during the war. Western and Eastern France. Western is Portugal. So originally, lots of expenditure in Portugal. 1704, the seizure of Gibraltar. But 1705, troops are sent from Portugal to Barcelona. Why keep on paying? Actually, more or less to keep Portugal in the war on Britain's side. Whilst Eastern front is Valencia and Barcelona. And see, British were paying till 1710, a little bit longer even then. What happened in 1705, in July, August? The fleet with Archduke on board left Lisbon for Catalonia. And when they were passing our coast here, Alicante, Alcoy, a certain military person, Juan Batista Basset, arrived on board and said that he could start the war from here, from Valencia. Not only from just Valencia, from Dénia. So 3 or 4 vessels without Carlos on board actually deviated towards Dénia. The bulk of the fleet went on for Catalonia. And on 18th August 1705, John Batista Basset declared Archduke Carlos here in Dénia as the King of Valencia, Carlos III. So that's Dénia's claim to fame. This is a brochure, not too long, not too big, but this is a brochure which was about the visit of the troops supporting Carlos III. His Majesty, His Catholic Majesty, never visited our town, but here is John Batista Basset declaring Carlos for the first time on Spanish land. Because before that, Carlos was based in Lisbon, in Portugal. But for the first time on Spanish land, Carlos, the Habsburg, was declared Carlos III of Valencia to start with, because it was in Valencian Kingdom. Dénia was part of Valencian Kingdom, okay? Juan Batista Basset, Joan Batista Basset. Yes, here it says he was Valencian hero of the War of Spanish Succession. A very unhappy hero. He was a general. He was fighting the Bourbons, and prior to that, he was supporting Habsburgs always. But from the start of the war, most of the time he spent in prisons. And moreover, he was imprisoned by his own compatriot, by his own side, by the Habsburgs, by Mr. Peterborough, a very famous gentleman, Lord Mordaunt, who was the commander of British and Habsburg's troops in Valencia. Long story. Some strange accident with horses, whether they should have been requisitioned or paid for, and so forth. Anyway, he was first imprisoned by Habsburgs, then released during the sieges of Dénia and Xàtiva in 1707, 1708, put to prison again, then resurfaced in Barcelona in 1713, was the commander of artillery during the siege of Barcelona, again by, commander on the side of Habsburgs, again Bourbons, but Barcelona was besieged and then fell. And all the rest of his life, Bassett spent in prisons. For lots of people in Valencia and Catalonia, he is the most brilliant revolutionary who ever lived on this land. But we will see plaques, memorial plaques to him, only in Valencia and Catalonia, no monuments. Strange history, what can you do? We have a little walk in the suburb of Dénia in La Chara, named after Bassett, but nothing else. Although he was the person who proclaimed the Archduke, Habsburg Archduke as a king of Spain here in Dénia, as a king of Valencia, excuse me. And would you imagine, we even have in this middle, or in the center of Dénia proper, modern proper, Plaza Archiduque Carlos I. Okay, he never was Carlos I, and I've written to Google Maps saying that, look, please change the name because he is just Archduke Carlos. Because if he would have become, you know, Carlos the King, he would become Carlos III, not the first, okay? But anyway, Dénia was quite a small town, and Dénia was absolutely devastated after the war. 3 sieges, 1705, 1707, 1708. We have this street in Dénia, which is called Carrer de la Brecha, the street of the opening in the wall, made by French troops during one of the sieges in 1707. So 17th November 1708, the town finally fell to Bourbons. Absolutely military and financial disaster for the town. The debt is 1-something million. The income is about 6,000 only. 36 vecinos left in the town. Vecinos meaning neighbors, whether it's a family or one inhabitant. Well, okay, if it's a family, then about 100, 150 people left only, because all others just ran away from the town during the siege. And lots of French families came. Modern Dénia is owned to a certain extent by those French families, still, okay, they're Dénian families, they're Spanish families. Merle, Chabas, Borderoa. There is a saying, you are more rich than Morant. Okay, all these families came from France after the war. So by 1794, we had 500 inhabitants in Dénia, but actually 1,000 in Habia. Habia was on the side of Bourbons during the war. That's interesting. So when you go to the Maritime Museum, the new Maritime Museum in Dénia, you will see these funny sculptures, but you will see Presidencia, Francia. They came from France in this same age, this same century, the 18th century we're talking about. As there were lots of plans of rebuilding Dénia after the war, for instance, like doing this fancy system of bastions and so forth. We only had one bastion built, here it is, and that was according to the rules set up by Marshal Vauban, who was the favorite architect, the military architect of Louis XIV, of Louis XIV. Gradually, Dénia started reviving, the same as Valencia. So Valencia started developing silk industry. There's a fantastic Colegio del Arte Mayor de la Seda, the college of the major arts of silk making in Valencia, and Dénia was quite active in silk manufacturing as well. Then we had different commercial, agricultural societies, the Economic Support Society, and the Academia Real de Bellas Artes, the Fine Arts Academy, was started during this epoch in 1768 in Valencia as well. So the second part of 18th century is really the time of revival, the time of enlightenment. And this Baroque of the end of 17th century, the beginning of 18th century in Valencia is fantastic. This is the entrance to the cathedral, Puerta de los Hierros. This is the Church of San Nicholas de Bari, which is called the Valencian Sistine Chapel. The Palacio, the Palace of Marquess of Dos Agos is here with absolutely fantastic sculptures. We left Philip V. Let's come back to him. He was on Spanish throne for 46 years. He had 3 children from 2 wives. One was from Savoy. She died in 1714. The other one from Italy, from Parma, Isabel. And 2 of the sons of Philip V and Maria Luisa de Saboya became kings, but Louis I only for 1 year. Philip V abdicated, made his son a king, but the king died. Philip V came back to the throne, and all historians are saying there were 2 Philips. Before 1724 and after. He lost all power to rule, and really passed most of his decision-making to his wife. Here she is, Isabel Farnese from Parma. And Fernando VI was a king, but I can't say he was very, very important king. And later, Carlos III, a very important king, became the king of Spain much, much later. Hello, girls. So that's the history. The only thing we should mention is the Granja. Granja is the Spanish Versailles. Granja is not far from Madrid. It's situated to the north of Madrid, towards Segovia. And well, if you're in Madrid, please try to visit it. It's not far from Escorial, and this is the place where Philip V, the longest serving monarch in Spain, 1700 to 1746, spent most of his life. And we have to mention Duke of Berwick and his palace of Liria. Again, another place to visit in Madrid. Why? English connection. James II, Stuart, who, as we remember, left England in 1688 during the Glorious Revolution. Of course, he had an official son, James III, Stuart, James III. And of course, their supporters were Jacobites. Where they were based? In France. That's why the problems. That's why Britain actually, or first England and then Britain, joined the war of Spanish succession. But James II also had a mistress, Arabella Churchill, the sister of John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough. They had a son, and a legal son, of course, who was called James Fitz-James. You remember, Fitz was the part of the surname to denominate an illegal son. But he was promoted very quickly. He was a bright person, and he participated very actively in the war for Spanish succession, of course, on the French, on the Bourbon side. He was against British. He was against English. That's understandable. Jacobites were always against British, and that's understandable, no problem. And he was the one who was the winner at Almansa. So really, the killer of the kingdom of Valencia and of Aragon on the 25th of April, 1707. He was made the first Duke of Berwick. Here is the ceremony of Philip V, making Fitz-James the Duke of Berwick. What on? He became the Comandante General del Reino de Valencia in 1707. He promoted those new laws to actually abolish the Kingdom of Valencia. Essentially, that his son, the second Duke of Berwick, was Spain's first ambassador to Russia in 1727. But more interesting is the story of Cayetana. Cayetana was the most noble person of the 20th century. Everyone knew her in Spain. After a number of marriages, she actually died in 2014, but she was the 11th Duchess of Berwick and 18th Duchess of Alba, blah, 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 blah. So she was actually Fitz-James Stuart, the most famous nobility person in modern Spain came all the way from Churchill's. Well, illegally, but still, and from Stuarts. So that's the interesting connection between Marlboroughs and Berwicks. So that was quite funny that Berwick, a British person by origin, was fighting on the Bourbon side because he was a Stuart, and Churchill was fighting for Habsburgs, basically, actually for Stuarts and Hanovers. Now, Carlos III, an enlightened king. I like him. He's one of my favorite kings. Carlos I and Carlos III. These are the two kings I like over the last 500 years in the country of Spain. He was a hard-working emperor. First, his mom, Farnese, made him to promote him to become a Duke of Parma and Piacenza. A very important position here in the center of Italy. And then there was a little war. Spain returning Naples and Sicily, and Carlos became the king of Naples and Sicily, whilst his brother Ferdinand was the king of Spain. Then Ferdinand died, and Carlos finally, 1758, became the king of Spain for 30 years. He's called the best mayor of Madrid, el mejor alcalde del Madrid. And when we come to Madrid, when we see Prado, Cibeles, and this triumphant arc to him at Alcalá in Madrid, we know that's all about Carlos III. Here is his portrait by Goya, already the last years of his life, quite sad, quite tired, because he had to run all of this. All of this was Spanish. The same in Spain, in South America. And what is very important, here we have Bourbon dominions showing in the same color. But the agreement after the war was that two branches of Bourbons, the French one and the Spanish one, would never be united. So to a certain extent, that was a loss for the Sun King, that he never was able to say that there is a possibility that Spain and France become one country. I don't know why Portugal is here shown as Bourbon Dominion. It was not, of course. Anyway, Carlos III, a brilliant character, an interesting character, a working emperor. If he wouldn't have died that early, 1788, I don't know, probably even the French Napoleonic Wars would never happen. Who knows, who knows. Anyway, in my book, in my other book, I made sort of map, a scheme of all European dynasties for about 500 years or 700 years in different colors. This is page 2, and you can see, first of all, Philip V was married twice, to Maria Luisa de Saboya and to Isabel Farnese. And Philip is shown in two colors, the French Bourbons and the Spanish Bourbons, but then all his sons were Spanish Bourbons. So Luis and Fernanda were sons of Maria Luisa de Saboya, and Carlos III here was the son of Isabel Farnese. And then it was nice and simple, although of course with some Carlos IV, Fernando VII, they were not very pleasant kings and people. Isabel II, well, a queen of sad destiny, although she was a queen for 30 years. Then restoration in 1881, Alfonso XII and XIII, then the First Republic. And then only Juan Carlos becoming a king in 1975 during the last years of Franco and after the death of Franco. And Philip VI coming in 2014. He was told, please, please, please don't take the name Philip, because Philip V, especially for us here in Valencia, in Xàtiva, was not a very pleasant character. Well, but still, he insisted on becoming the king of Spain, Philip VI. And then now you know that he is a representative of the Spanish Bourbons. So, okay, we've covered the 18th century. This is chapter 8 of our book. We only have 4 chapters to cover, of which 2 will be historical and 2 will be more or less geographical. Thank you very much for your attention. That was George Grisham speaking to you from Dénia, Spain. Goodbye.